This weekend, the US Vice President J.D. Vance used his trip to Britain not merely for carp fishing with David Lammy, but to warn that Britain risks travelling a dark path on free speech. One, he says, the United States already took under Joe Biden. Now, Vance's message was clear. Western democracies are becoming too comfortable with censorship rather than engaging with a diverse array of opinions. And his words came in the middle of reports that 1,000 people a month in Britain are arrested for online speech offences, a startling statistic when set against Britain's self-image as a place, as the historic cradle of the liberty of speech. And to unpack this warning, it needs to be set in the long arc of Britain's own freedom of speech tradition. A tradition rooted not in a written constitution as it is in America, but in the interplay of common law, parliamentary privilege, and really the moral imagination of great writers like John Milton. Britain's free speech heritage is paradoxical. It's ancient in rhetoric, it's fragile in law. So you go back to 1215 to the Magna Carta, where royal power was limited, but there's nothing in Magna Carta to guarantee a freedom of expression. In 1689, in the Bill of Rights, MPs were given freedom of speech in Parliament, but this wasn't offered to the general public. For the public, press freedom emerged only gradually in the 17th and the 18th centuries, often through the absence of pre-publication censorship rather than any affirmative right. And the British model was always pragmatic. Parliament could expand or restrict free speech at will, and that flexibility was both a strength and a weakness. In 1644, protesting at Parliament's licensing order of 1643, which reimposed pre-publication censorship, the poet John Milton wrote a book called Areopagitica. And there are key Miltonic principles. In fact, I think I've even got a copy of that book here. There we are. That's probably too big. This is there's a front page, and there's the title page of a more recent edition, Areopagitica. It was written during the English Civil War, and it protested Parliament's licensing order of 1643. Now, the key principles that Milton puts forward still resonate in today's debates. He talks against prior restraint. Give me the liberty to know, to utter, to argue freely, according to conscience, above all liberties. And let her, truth in contest, let her and falsehood grapple, whoever knew truth put to the worst in a free and open encounter. And censorship, pre-publication approval, assumes the public are incapable of discernment. It kills reason itself, says Milton. A trial by opposition, virtue grows not from shelter, but from engagement with error. That which purifies us is trial, and trial by what is contrary. Milton was no modern absolutist. He still excluded popery and open superstition, but his defence of the open contest of ideas became a cornerstone of later liberal thought, influencing Locke, Mill, and across the Atlantic, Jefferson and Madison. When the American founders wrote the First Amendment in 1791, they constitutionalized what Britain had left to Parliament's discretion. In the US, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. It made suppression of free speech legally suspect, even when politically tempting. Britain retained parliamentary sovereignty and parliamentary supremacy. This meant speech could be, and has been, curtailed whenever Parliament judged it expedient, from wartime censorship to hate speech laws. So this banging on about the right to free speech, we don't have a right to free speech unless Parliament approves it in Britain. Britain's history is rich with moments of the suppression of free speech. From 1640 through to 1650, the Royalists and the parliamentarians both censored free speech heavily. In 1790, the radical reformers like Thomas Paine were prosecuted for seditious libel. World War I, World War II, the Defence of the Realm Acts shut down dissent and reporting. In 1988 to 1994, there was a protesting ban on Sinn Féin voices, and post 7/7 speech criminalised what was termed glorifying terrorism. And today, the Online Safety Act and the existing Communications Act, these provisions mean police increasingly intervene over social media speech, sometimes in cases more about offence than actual harm. And J.D. Vance's warning that Western governments are censoring rather than engaging echoes Milton's central conviction that truth emerges from contest, not suppression. And if Areopagitica argued against licensing pamphlets, Vance is arguing against algorithmic throttling, deplatforming, and criminalising online speech. You don't have to agree with something to promote its publication. The underlying principle is the same. Censorship signals a lack of confidence in the public's moral and intellectual agency. And while I'm not a great fan of J.D. Vance, in the past I've called him the hamster, and I thought he was extremely rude to President Zelensky. I entirely endorse his attitude to free speech. I think he's wrong to assume that we have a right to free speech, because we don't in Britain. That right is controlled by Parliament. But I think the laws, particularly the online safety law, is wrong. I think it's badly structured and it's almost impossible to police. And I think the threat to free speech, which is implicit in the 500 plus people who've been arrested over the weekend for their banners proclaiming solidarity with Palestine and an opposition to genocide, is this is an absurd overreach by the Home Office. And where Milton saw Parliament usurping God's gift of reason, Vance sees governments undermining civic trust on which democracy rests, and I think he's right. The UK's present position is historically anomalous. Arrest rates for online posts are high. Police and prosecutors are asked to adjudicate what is harmful or grossly offensive, often without clear statutory limits. This is not prior restraint in the old licensing sense, but it is a post hoc punishment that chills debate. And Milton would have recognised the effect. Even without an official censor's stamp, writers self-silence to avoid costly trouble. And Britain's free speech tradition, which precedes that of America's, the religious upheaval and the world wars, were precisely because there has been a presumption, however patchy, in favour of open debate. Vance's intervention, though politically barbed, reminds us that this presumption is now seriously at risk. And Milton's test still applies. Do we trust truth to win in a free and open encounter? Or do we preemptively constrain the encounter out of fear? And the answer will determine whether Britain remains heir to its own rhetorical tradition of liberty or drifts into the dark path that Vance warns against.